Dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The march through our institutions persists, hastening in speed. Under the new regime, there are no alcoholics or drug addicts, any alcohol misusers and drug users. Instead, this all comes under the NHS Inclusivity Guide. Next, we'll be asking men if they're pregnant before giving blood. Oh wait, they've already started doing that just north of Hadrian's Wall. The green fanatics of Newspeak are also coming after Brecon Beacons. More on that shortly. And have the Just Stop Oil protesters snookered themselves? We'll be taking a deeper look at some of their outlandish claims after one of their activists took it upon himself to disrupt the Crucible last night. Dare I say, they might have missed their cue. For dessert, it's quiche. Coronation quiche, to be specific. But I'm horrified by this whole debacle. A Coronation Tornadoes Rossini would do much better. William Sitwell will be zooming in from God's Own county of Somerset to discuss it. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be tucking into the agenda with our glorious panel, the mighty Tim Stanley of the Daily Telegraph for the filling, and the tremendous Ben Glaze of the Daily Mirror for the icing on the cake. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now it's time for the all-important headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Jacob, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Home Secretary is set to declare the small boat crisis a national emergency. The move comes in response to a High Court challenge tomorrow aimed at halting government plans to house asylum seekers on an old RAF base in Essex. Braintree Council will attempt to secure an injunction preventing the transfer of 1,700 migrants to the Wethersfield airbase. The declaration of a national emergency would give the Home Office powers to ignore local authority objections if the plans relate to Crown-owned property. Well, this all comes as the latest figures show more than 5,000 people have crossed the English Channel so far this year. The SNP treasurer has been arrested by police investigating the party's finances. Colin Beattie is the second person to be questioned by detectives who are trying to establish how more than £600,000 in donations set aside for an independence referendum had been used. Earlier this month, the Scottish National Party's former chief executive, Peter Murrell, was questioned for more than 11 hours. Mr Murrell, who's the husband of former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, was released without charge pending further investigation. When questioned in Holyrood, SNP leader Humza Yousaf hit back at the Conservatives.
It is brave, some may use another word for it, when it comes to talking about propriety. Your Prime Minister, your Deputy Prime Minister and the former Prime Minister are all under investigation by the Standards Commission. So yes, while we face challenges, while we absolutely face challenges, I'd rather be standing here with the opportunity to deliver for the people of Scotland rather than languishing in the opposition like Megan Gallagher and the Scottish Tories.
The Minister also set out his vision for the country in his first major policy statement since taking office. Mr Yousaf said the party will focus on equality, opportunity and community. He also announced a delay in the deposit return scheme for drinks cans and bottles, as well as a 6-month trial to remove peak time fares from ScotRail trains. Labour's calling on the Prime Minister to publish his financial interests. Parliament's ethics watchdogs investigating whether Rishi Sunak failed to tell MPs his wife might benefit from a major announcement in last month's budget. She holds shares in a childcare agency that's likely to gain financially from a drive to recruit more childminders. Number 10 says Mr Sunak will clarify why it was declared as a ministerial interest rather than to the Commons. Charities and campaigners are warning new rules for energy suppliers don't go far enough. Firms across England, Scotland and Wales have agreed to a new voluntary code of practice to help protect vulnerable people. Under the new rules, suppliers must make at least 10 attempts to contact a customer and carry out a welfare visit before a prepayment meter can be installed. The End Fuel Poverty Coalition says the plans fail to deal with energy debt relief for those most in need. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's over to Jacob.
Words are the scaffolding of action. They have a power within them. They end up determining how we lead our lives. And that's why it's quite important that the Green fanatics have had a go at the Brecon Beacons. It's about control. Nobody in their right mind, until yesterday, thought that the beacon in Brecon Beacons was anything to do with climate change. It wouldn't have crossed anybody's mind. They didn't think about a beacon with coal on it spewing out dirty fumes. They thought the Brecon Beacons were a beautiful place that they could go and visit. But control of language is the precursor of state control of thought. If you control what people say, the way they formulate their ideas, then you begin to control what they think and you begin to control what they do. And this is why it's so important, and it colours the political debate. And over the last 20 or 30 years, our political debate has effectively been controlled by the left, who have become the arbiters of language, what you can and you can't say. Now, I hope with Brecon Beacon that they have overreached themselves and made people realise how ridiculous this is, and that we will push back. Those of us who believe that language should be used properly will push back and use it to its full extent, so that we don't get any more NHS inclusivity guides, which don't allow you to assume that somebody is a man or a woman. You've got to find out first, or expect a man to say that he's not pregnant when it's perfectly obvious that a man is not going to be pregnant, or that you call alcohol misusers rather than alcoholics, and you don't define drug addicts, or you don't tell people who are fat that they're fat. If you don't tell people the truth, how are they able to learn? How are they able to know what the basic need is for them? And this has been going through the civil service as well. There are 441 woke training courses in the civil service, some of which I tried to get rid of when I was in the Cabinet Office, such as check yo privilege, give me strength, which we all need, leading without authority. As Minister for Government Efficiency, I did try to get rid of 250 of these, but there were still over 100 left. So what we've got to do is push back to get control of our own language and not use the newspeak terms. So what do I mean by this? Well, say things as they are. Call spades spades. If you're a Yorkshireman, call a spade a shovel. Be clear. And don't give in to the politically correct brigade, or indeed to those with a political agenda. Why on earth do people not still refer to Burma? Why are we told what to do by a totalitarian regime that got rid of a democratically elected regime? Why do we go along with that? We shouldn't. We should call Burma Burma. We should use proper English words such as chairman and spokesman. We shouldn't refer to somebody who is chairing a meeting as the chair. A chair is a piece of furniture, not an individual, because language matters. Once you lose the language, you lose the thought, you lose the action, you are controlled. And the left have been brilliantly clever about this and about getting control of the way we think to get their message across, because once you decide what people are allowed to say, soon or later, you decide what they're going to do. As always, I want to know what you think. Get in touch. Email me at mailmog@GBNews. And I'm now joined by a brilliant panel. The commendable Tim Stanley of the Daily Telegraph and the praiseworthy Ben Glaze of the Daily Mirror. Ben, let me come to you first, because you're from South Wales. Are you in favour of Brecon Beacons being renamed? Did you ever think of it in green terms before it was renamed?
I must say, I grew up 25 miles away from Brecon Beacons in Cardiff, and have been through the Beacons dozens of times. And each time when we drive up the A470, you see the sign saying, "Welcome to Brecon Beacons National Park." And now in hindsight, I realise I was looking at a beacon. I didn't realise that at the time. It never occurred to me until yesterday morning when I heard this on the news and read it in the paper. And the justification that they're using to fight climate change, I must say, I don't see that. I haven't seen beacons burning on the top of Pen y Fan ever. But I do think they've got a point in renaming them to reclaim the Welsh language, the Welsh identity element of it. Banai Brycheiniog. Now, King Brychan, he was a 5th century king of the kingdom, which basically encompasses the national parks. So in terms of trying to rejuvenate the Welsh language and create a bit more of that Welsh identity, I agree with that element, but linking it to climate change, I think that's probably a bit too much. And I do wonder how much it will affect tourism, because everyone knows where the Brecon Beacons are. Do people know where Banai Brycheiniog is?
And Tim, isn't language fundamentally important? Every day you're writing language to get an argument across, and how you phrase it and how you structure it is surely fundamental.
Absolutely, although language does change. As we encounter other people, new words enter our dictionary, and there may be some occasions when we restore and revive old words. And as soon as I start hearing about Welsh kings, well, I want to hear more of that. The problem with this change is, first of all, it's been done for the wrong reason. It's about climate change rather than necessarily just about the restoration of heritage. And of course there are places in this country called things like Coalfield. Are we going to change all those names? Are we going to go through systematically and alter every name? So the reasoning behind it seems to me to be flawed. But also, if you're going to make a change, do something which is in common usage. I've no problem with changing a name if indeed the local people call it something different, or if it's known as something different, and there's been some awful bureaucratic decision in the past to give it a false name. That's absolutely fine. But if it's an artificial change that the rest of the country won't recognise, well, then you sort of displace people within their own geography. They start looking at maps and thinking, I don't know where I am anymore, and that's a bit weird.
And to come to the point on Welsh history, I mean, that is very interesting for everybody. So wouldn't it be sensible to use both names and then see if over time the Welsh name becomes more familiar, more commonplace, and people then use it naturally, but they also get to know about a 5th century Welsh king whom you never know may have met King Arthur.
I suspect that's what will happen over time. People will start using both alongside each other. You know, people going on their holidays from England or Scotland into the Beacons, they're not going to start calling it by its Welsh name. People in Wales they might start doing it. Certain people in Welsh speakers in the parts of the country where Welsh language is the first language, they may already have done it. And
was this, sorry to interrupt, but was this the Welsh name beforehand that Welsh speakers used, or have they made it up? Recently?
Going back hundreds of years, I think it was to the 16th century, then it was known locally.
OK, but nobody's called it by its new name.
It was new to me.
It was new to you?
Yeah.
OK. That's to Tim's point. It becomes a bit phony if you're reinventing something that hasn't been used for 400 years.
There is that, but equally, as Tim said, we're learning more about history because of it. You know, the fact we're talking about it and discovering King Brychan from the 5th century.
Brychan. We will have to get his name right and the pronunciation. But to turn to the NHS, the use of language there, the reluctance to refer to mothers or to women, this is very insidious, isn't it? Because it's trying to imply that there is a change in society that hasn't actually been.
Oh, going forward, it's highly problematic. I couldn't agree with you more. And they picked the wrong words when they started to try to change medical terms that relate to gender, because that's so incredibly personal. And there the meaning for most of us is uncontested. It might be contested academically, but for women, they know what a woman is, they know what a mother is, and attempting to change the language without consultation forces them to reimagine themselves at their most personal, because this is often quite gynecological language. So it was simply a step too far. And it speaks to your point about how if you can control language, you can control people's imaginations, and therefore you can shape the way they think and the way that they act.
Well, that's the thing that concerns me, is it's actually deeply political, changing names, changing definitions, because you want people to think in a certain way, and you want to stop them thinking what they've always thought before, and that this is the sort of perpetual revolution of the left. Language does evolve.
You know, if you're known around Westminster as one of the politest MPs there are, a man of manners. If someone said that something you said offended them and they spoke to you one-on-one, I suspect you might think twice about how you use that language one-on-one. When you talk in generalities, and when I say you, I don't mean you personally, when one talks in generalities, that's when it becomes a bit more difficult and overwhelming, perhaps. But language does evolve. You know, there are obviously certain terms that were commonplace 40, 50 years ago, which, you know, are taboo now, quite rightly. It may be in 20, 30 years we're looking back and thinking, how did we ever say that? I suspect that won't happen with things like chairman and spokesman. And as a sort of traditional journalist, I don't write spokesperson in copy. We still write spokesman and spokeswoman. And I think that is important. But language does evolve, and it's incumbent on all of us, obviously, not to go out of our way to offend.
But that's what worries me, because I absolutely agree with you that if somebody said to me, you saying that upsets me, I would try not to do it. And if somebody wants to be known as they, and that's fine by me, it's not for me to tell people how they should be known. But I have a nasty feeling that good manners is used against us to follow a very specific political agenda that wants to change things and wants to change what we think about things.
And which also takes something away from people. Now, this is important. Very often, identitarian causes are sold to us as they're about inclusivity and diversity and opening things up to people. When you start to change language and you start to fight over the terrain of people's perception of themselves, you're actually taking something away. So if you take away the word mother, it's not just that you're opening up the concept of motherhood to men who've gone through a sex change or whatever, you're also taking away a very specific identity from women that they really don't think they can be alienated from. They don't see how it can be taken away.
But do you perhaps be more contentious, if it is possible to be more contentious than how mothers are defined, to call somebody fat? If you are a doctor and you've got somebody who is fat and you say that, you are, to some extent, telling them they've got responsibility and that they need to do something about it. If you use some euphemism, then you're beginning to pretend it's not really their responsibility. It's somebody else's responsibility. Somebody else will take care of it. And that, I think, is where it becomes more political, because you're undermining personal responsibility and throwing the problem onto the state. You're not fat because you eat too much. You're fat because of the advertising industry. Therefore, the advertising industry should not be allowed to sell crisps before 9 in the evening.
When one walks down the street and sees a fat person, one doesn't think of medical terms. One thinks there's a fat person, right? But within medicine, there are, I understand, certain levels of what counts as obese and various other terms. But yes, telling someone, look, you shouldn't necessarily... It's not healthy to be this weight, and it's incumbent upon you to lose some of it. Therefore, you'll be less likely to have heart disease, diabetes, etc., etc. I think that is important, and ultimately benefits the person themselves and society in general. You know, if we can cut the cost to the taxpayer of the NHS, yeah.
So it's a combination of good manners and straight thinking. Thank you very much, my meretricious panel. They will be back shortly, so don't go anywhere. Don't forget to let me know what you think, Rees-Mogg at GB News. But coming up, the Just Stop Oil recalcitrants are back at it again, and I'll be debating one of them next. And of course, you'll want to find out why the French only eat one egg for breakfast.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Steve says, would it not be simpler to put the Welsh name in brackets underneath the Brecon Beacon sign, or am I missing the point? Also, I'm unable to pronounce the Welsh version. This time Stephen runs, Steve says, the most ridiculous one so far is Fisher them. Fisher them, that is a new one to me. And Jerry says, hi Jacob. If you're truly offended by the language of climate protesters and green warriors, you as a politician are in a uniquely privileged position to put a stop to it. All it requires is that you are honest and tell people it's all a political construct. There is not now, nor has there ever been, a climate crisis. It's all about money, power and control, and never was anything to do with the environment. But look at me. asking a politician to come clean and give up the justification for taxing air. Never going to happen, is it? Well, I hope we don't tax air. But as we reported on this programme last night with our animal rights guest, the self-appointed Just Stop Oil gorillas thought it appropriate to interrupt the World Snooker Championship last night. All of this amidst the even more extraordinary news that Extinction Rebellion is expecting a 30,000-strong protest to be held this weekend. So there's more like it to come, but I think if they want to change the law, they should stand for Parliament and see if they can win votes. I think the problem for these groups is potentially in their name, Just Stop Oil. Surely they should call themselves more palatable, such as Free Foie Gras, because that's what we want, and be more effective and popular. But today we thought we'd look into some of the claims that the activists have been making. And with me now to discuss this is the Just Stop Oil spokesman, Sean Irish. Sean, first of all, thank you very much for coming in today. What would happen if we did just stop oil?
Hi, Jacob. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so my name is Sean. I'm 26. I'm from the Just Stop Oil Coalition. We are demanding that the UK government end all new fossil fuel licences in the UK. So, as you know yourself, you've heard our demand before. We are asking for an immediate halt to all oil and gas. We need a just transition. But I did think it was quite appropriate that you're a supporter of foie gras, such a cruel and horrible sport, horrible food style.
But if we just stopped oil now, the lights would go out.
Well, we wouldn't have to see you then, would we? But we're not asking for that. We are asking for an end to new oil and gas licences.
But then we import it from abroad, and the emissions are greater. We went through this with fracking. If we used our own shale gas, we would reduce the emissions by between 2 and 60.
So the UK currently has more than enough oil and gas domestically to last us the next 8 years. What you're talking about, you should be saying to nationalise the energy system then, because the only reason we import it, most of the UK oil and gas is exported. We use it elsewhere. If we use our own oil and gas, that's not happening now.
No, we're not self-sufficient in oil and gas. We don't begin to be self-sufficient. We have between half and a third, depending on the weather, of our own gas supplies.
What we need to look at is we are looking at what the climate crisis is a red light for humanity. This is what the world scientists are saying, that we need to take action. I'm glad you highlighted that Extinction Rebellion will be out this weekend. And from the 24th...
Why don't you stand for election?
So many of us have stood for election.
And do you win?
Yes, actually, some of us have gotten into power, actually, believe it or not. Because
nobody in Parliament?
A lot of politicians do recognise that dying for an oil-balanced profits is not in the interest of their constituents.
It's not that, it's making sure the lights stay on and people have heat and warmth. And because of the reduction of
with renewables, a variety of renewables is much more... The thing is, lights will go out when the climate collapses. There will be no lights on when the country cannot run.
We've had a massive growth in renewables, but if you take renewables over the winter, when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, how are people to heat and light their homes?
So one, Jacob, you're a well-educated man, you've been to university, you know that solar has come a lot further than that. The solar actually can work even on a cloudy day these days.
It can't work at night though, can it?
No, but it can work. But so you can have a variety. You can have tidal, you can have wind, you can have all sorts of...
Tidal gives you power twice a day.
Tidal can work through a river, not just tidal power, you can have river power, you can have all sorts, you can have a variety of energy. Jacob,
you can,
you need to be clear about this,
right? The wind is not a secure supply.
What political aims do you want to have? Because whatever it is, we should be on the same side. Without green energy, without renewables, there is no future in the UK.
What are we getting to make up for the supply when it's a cold day and there's a surge in demand and there's no wind?
You can use tidal, you can use...
Only twice a day?
You can use river power, you can use all sorts of different renewables.
There isn't enough river power.
The point is, at the moment, the UK is not reducing at the level that it needs to. We are not insulating British homes, we are not investing in green jobs, and we are not investing in public transportation.
On insulation, you discover that after 3 years, people use more heating. That they take the saving in years 1 and 2, and in year 3, there's been a study showing that people have just put their heating up.
In what world? I'd like to see, I'd like to see that study. I'd like to see that study.
This was a study reported by
Jacob, will you be joining us on the 24th of April at 1 p.m. for a march to end new oil and gas from Parliament Square?
No, of course I won't, because I want my constituents to have warm homes.
Climate crisis.
I want them to have warm homes and have economic prosperity.
We are already seeing crops burning in the field, Jacob. There are crops burning in the field in the UK. The only benefit to the climate crisis that we're seeing right now is that we can grow grapes and wine in the UK now, but we will have millions and billions of refugees, thousands of people fleeing to this country, and you're against immigration. You have a strong stance against immigration. How is that going to happen?
I'm against lunatic extremism.
The climate crisis
there is not this level of crisis at all.
According to the science, there is. Your own scientists, Jacob, your own scientists are saying it.
We've actually got an area of greenness equivalent to twice the size of Australia where we can grow crops, helping the food supply. We've seen, because of warmer temperatures...
Jacob, how many Welsh farmers have gone out of business in the last 20 years?
Welsh farmers have not been going out of business because of climate change. What has been the threat to Welsh farmers is whether or not producing lamb
so
in
their
Wales
turnips
is
haven't been
competitive.
dying, their food hasn't been cut, they haven't had crops failure. There was no crop failures last year, Jacob, was there not? There was no crop failures.
Last year, we saw crops coming through
we lost
better.
1/3 of our wheat, 50%
we lost
of our...
Ukraine, and then we saw more wheat being grown in other parts of the world. I mean, these things are being made up. Even the IPCC is accepting that we've got more crops being grown. We've got, on average, 2% crop growth, agricultural productivity growth, every year for the last 200 years. That hasn't changed.
Is that on average?
That's on average.
That's a bit of a problem. In the last 30 to 40 years, we've had a massive... Of course we have. In the last 200 years, we had massive investments, massive change in the scientific way in which we develop crops. In the last 20 to 30 years, we have seen a decimation of the natural cycles.
We have not seen a decimation of crops in the last 20 years. We've actually seen more crops being grown.
In the last
we have been increasing
last year
productivity.
In the UK, we increased productivity when most of our crops failed.
Globally.
When there was 40-degree heat, houses were on fire, the fire brigade was in the worst it had ever been since World War II.
Globally, we are growing more crops than ever before. And genetically modified crops are improving our productivity even further.
Yes, but it only gets us so far, Jacob.
This crisis isn't there. It's invented.
By whom? Who is benefiting? By me personally, yes, Jacob.
You are part of a system that wishes to frighten people into having a lower standard of living. I don't know why you want to do this.
We do not want people to have a lower standard of living. People will have no standard of living and a climate crisis. Look what happened to Syria when it collapsed. Look what happened to other countries when they collapsed.
Syria?
When the UK collapses...
Syria did not collapse because of climate change. It collapsed because of a dictator. I didn't say it collapsed because of the climate crisis.
I said it collapsed. And what happens when countries collapse? Your standard of living goes down.
Yes.
The UK is already at threat. The UK is at threat. That is what the scientists are saying.
There's no threat to the UK.
According to the world scientists, and as one of your lovely commenters just said, I would not trust a politician.
All right, but which world scientist has said that the UK...
IPCC
this is not what the IPCC
we are on code red
said.
for humanity. We are looking at having up to 1 billion climate refugees by the end of the century.
The IPCC has actually noted that climate change has led to fewer deaths from weather events than before because more people die from cold than from heat.
We have better equipment to defend ourselves than previous generations. We have better homes, but that's still not good enough.
That's the whole point. Humanity's always been adaptable.
Yes, but you cannot adapt to a flood. If you are drowned in water, you will not grow.
The Dutch have adapted to water levels for hundreds of years. You can adapt to water levels.
But not forever, Jacob. It's not inevitable.
We have always adapted. Agricultural productivity is increased.
On the 24th of April, you should join us at 1 p.m. because we will not have a future.
Because I actually don't want to join in this alarmism. I want my constituents not to be made cold and poor. I want their standard of living to rise.
I understand why you don't want an alarmism, because your way of life depends on there being no alarm. If the people learn what's happening, they will rise up.
Cheap energy.
And that is why you do not want an alarm.
Cheap energy
because you depend on it.
Biggest improver of people's standards of living
over
centuries.
Let's go with renewables. It's 9 times cheaper. 9 times cheaper renewable energy.
This is an invented figure. But thank you very much, Sean. I hope you don't target the cricket. Coming up, Ofgem has made the controversial decision to continue to allow energy companies to install forcibly prepayment energy meters. We'll be discussing that later in relation to the rights of enforcement. Oh, and you'll find out towards the end what do you call your angry French aunt.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities.
especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
With your thoughts. Mark says, Jacob, you've got to realise that you're talking to a zealot. If it wasn't for your friend Cameron, we'd have an open and honest debate on climate, but we can't because of his rules on nobody disagrees with me, change that, change the narrative. Jerry says, with all the likely environmental protests this summer and beyond, perhaps it's now time to cancel the Glastonbury Festival forever. After all, the carbon footprint of each festival must be enormous. But it's in Somerset and people love going to Somerset, and I wouldn't wish to deter them from going to God's Own County. Just a few weeks ago, the Times newspaper broke the story that energy companies had been breaking into people's houses and installing prepayment meters. Ofgem promptly announced an investigation, with many expecting the entire practice to be banned. Well, today, Ofgem has declared its decision to ban the practice in homes of the severely ill, as well as those aged over 85, and this has been met with criticism for not going far enough. But the real issue here is not the installation of the prepayment meters, it's the mass approval of the warrants by the court service, who weren't looking at whether the warrants were sensible or not. One of our great protections, one of our great freedoms, the idea that an Englishman's home is his castle, is you can't go in without a warrant that has to be or ought to be individually signed off by a judge or a magistrate. But energy companies were able to apply for thousands in one go and have them approved. With me, back again, is my brilliant panel, Tim Stanley of the Daily Telegraph and the magisterial Ben Glaze of the Daily Mirror. Ben, there's a lot of sympathy with people who had prepayment meters installed. It seems to me that two big unfairnesses. One, that the warrants were approved without proper process, and secondly, that you pay more for a prepayment meter than you do if you're on a direct debit.
It's outrageous that people who are on prepayment meters, they're the poorest in society. It's because they basically can't have direct debits that they end up having prepayment meters installed. And then the fact they're charged more than the rest of us who pay by direct debit, that's outrageous, and I think that really needs to be clamped down on. Now, when it comes to how these warrants were issued, I remember covering magistrates' courts back 18, 19 years ago. And I'd be in there sometimes covering a drink drive or something like that when someone would come in from an energy company and say that they wanted to go in, cut off someone's electricity or install a prepayment meter. And the magistrate had to hear the case. They had to give sworn evidence. Now, that system's clearly changed with hundreds and thousands of warrants being granted en masse. Now, that, thank heavens, that's currently... There's a stop on that, thanks to a judge called Lord Justice Edith. So it has to be, that ban needs to be rescinded for the practice to start again.
And that seems to me to be perfectly proper, Tim, that if an energy company has a customer who hasn't been paying, then it may be reasonable to go and get a court order to go into the home to put in a meter, but not for it to be approved without being considered, without due process. But that's not the energy company's fault, it's the fault of the court service.
True. I agree with you. I suspect I would go back one step and say I don't like the prepayment meter being installed against someone's will, full stop. And it is the company that wishes to do it. It might be that the government has set the rules in such a way that makes it possible, but it's still companies want people to be continuing to pay for energy at a certain rate. So the company bears moral responsibility for the decision to actually do it.
But isn't that a market decision with a variety of suppliers, that if you are a supplier who says, well, to your customer, I want you to have a prepayment meter, that is something that the market is allowed to decide. That's not an unreasonable practice in and of itself.
No, but it is forcing it upon them. I mean, it's a form of debtor's prison, except that rather than one just being in debt, the company is imprisoning so that you can continue buying their product.
But I don't get my subscription to the Daily Telegraph unless I pay you every month. That's not unreasonable. And then you give me some vouchers which are prepaid for. So Telegraph is doing prepayment.
No, but wonderful though the Telegraph is, it's not essential to living through a cold winter.
Telegraph has been essential to me for many years.
Well, of course it is, but I still wouldn't impose it on people, especially at a higher rate than those who are paying direct debits for it, because I, as a company, wish to continue to receive their money, especially during a period in which energy prices have risen so dramatically.
But isn't there an issue with the direct debits? Because the energy companies use those as a means of cheap funding. Not very successfully when interest rates were low, but now interest rates have gone up. If they have a large deposit from their customer, which they can determine because they set the direct debit, that's cheap cash to invest in their business.
I think I'm personally affected by this as well. There's several £100s sitting in our energy provider's account rather than our bank account. So I'm not delighted by that. And going back to what you were saying earlier, though, about the market deciding, well, basically the market for energy has failed. We haven't had a proper market since the energy price cap and the energy price guarantee. Now, with energy prices falling as they are, and they're predicted to be lower than the amount that the government has guaranteed you won't pay above in the next sort of 6 months, I suspect, it'll be interesting to see whether people do start changing suppliers again, because at the moment there's been no benefit in changing suppliers. But once deals are available again, and then you have to hope that the energy companies... Because remember, dozens of energy companies failed because they offered cheap deals and not hedged. If they're allowed to do that again, you could see a similar situation happening all over again. So one has to hope that the energy companies and indeed the regulators have learnt from what's happened over the past 2 years.
Yes, indeed. And the problem with the regulators faced, and I don't blame Ofgem for this particularly, is they had a price cap imposed on them on a very competitive system, and that created an impossible situation, and that actually the price cap was the problem, not the competitive market that Ofgem had been creating before.
Yes, it distorted the market, encouraged bad practice, but of course it's also that a lot of companies undercharged because, as you said, they overhedged on what they could get away with, and that created a false market that eventually blew up and brought those companies down. And when the market shrinks and when prices are so high, it doesn't seem to me to be fair to say that the poorest not only must continue to purchase from this market, but we'll actually turn up on your doorstep and physically force you to do so. I mean, markets are supposed to be free. I mean, Jacob, at the beginning of this discussion, you said it's a state failure. I agree, but this is market actors acting as though they are an arm of the state, as though they have the same kind of authority as the police to enter my household and compel me to buy their product at a certain rate.
And I really dislike this part of it, that I think, Ben, your point was such an important one, that it used to be a proper process in the magistrates' court, and the effort to make justice cheaper, the administration of justice cheaper, has led to injustice and unfairness, because actually when the energy companies had to go to a magistrate's court and have a magistrate sign the document, They very rarely did it because it was so expensive. And you get it done in the thousands and the tens of thousands when the process is streamlined and cheap.
And it was a pain for the employee of the energy company to come from head office, to come to this tiny little magistrates' court in South Wales Valleys. And, you know, these are people who are not used to appearing in front of magistrates. And you could see the effort they had to put in and how uncomfortable they were doing it. And even more uncomfortable because us gentlemen of the press were there writing it down. So they didn't like doing it. But once it becomes a sort of automatic thing and you can do it en masse, then it becomes much more attractive for the energy providers to do it.
And it's something fundamental to remember that actually an element of inefficiency creates more justice than an efficient, streamlined justice system which overrides people's rights.
Yes, I think that's absolutely fair. I know there's a debate to be had about people not managing their finances and therefore they get into a situation, so would prepaying actually help them? On the other hand, I see it from the point of view of people living in an economic crisis, which is not their fault, that not only is energy prices high, but food prices are high. There are a lot of things competing for their wallet. And if you've got specific circumstances in your life, like an ill relative, or you're pregnant, or anything like that, these things can get out of control. And the system must have flexibility to let those people off, essentially, and to recognise those circumstances, especially when they have no control over the nature of the economy right now.
Well, thank you very much to my panel, who we look forward to having back on again. Up next, what did the French chef give his wife on Valentine's Day? Like the other riddles, you'll have to wait to find out after these messages from our sponsors. Thank you very much.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day.
I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is still State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Ellison, I'm really sorry, but did I hear you say about Tornado's Rossini, my all-time favourite? By the way, love foie gras, but without the truffles for me. Top it up with a bottle of Chambertin. So Ellison is a man of very good taste. Pam says, I understood that the price on prepayment was being reduced to match other users, and I believe that is true. The companies also need to recoup debts. If the property had learnt maths, perhaps they would manage better. I think that's tough, Pam. And John says charging the poor a higher price for energy is indefensible, however a person looks at it. So, for those of you itching to know the answers to my French jokes, here we are. But you probably know them already because you're up to date with these things. But why do the French only eat one egg for breakfast? Because one is un œuf. What do you call an angry French aunt? A croissant. What did the French chef give to his wife on Valentine's Day? A hug and a little quiche. Which, of course, brings me on to my next subject, quiche. The King and the Queen have chosen quiche as their coronation dish. And I'm afraid I don't actually like quiche, not because it's French. Indeed, I think the French provide us with some of our best food, as I was mentioning earlier. Tornado's Rossini is one of my favourite things, and not actually because in 1982 Bruce Feirstein said real men don't eat quiche. It's simply, I don't like quiche, even if you call it flan. But I'm now joined by the restaurant critic for the Daily Telegraph and distinguished foodie, Mr. William Sitwell. Now, William, I believe you're a great fan of quiche and think it should practically be compulsory for breakfast, lunch and dinner.
Well, unlike you, Jacob, I enjoy food that actually tastes of something. I know that when you go out to a restaurant, you specifically instruct the chef not to put any garlic in your food. In other words, your instruction to the kitchen is to make sure that there is no flavour in food. And quiche is a fantastic dish. Obviously, it's portable. It takes a certain amount of skill to make it. You have to be able to master pastry, although these days, of course, you can buy very good versions of bought ready-made pastry, which you probably know, Jacob. And also, it's a great vessel for things like eggs. And in this particular circumstance, I'm very pleased that the King has showed his very good sense in that he has declared this quiche la reine should be the dish for the coronation. It's straightforward. He's not trying to compete with Constance Spry's amazing coronation chicken, which was a seminal joining of British and Indian cuisines, our friends across the empire in those days. So I think it's a very sensible idea. And actually, real men don't just eat quiche today. Real men can make a quiche, Jacob. Give it a try.
Well, I know that from P.G. Woodhouse that Anatole was a great chef, but I'm not sure Anatole would be very impressed by spinach and broad beans being put into a flan. It doesn't sound particularly exciting, particularly when you compare it with the feast served up for James II at his coronation, where they had all sorts of exciting things. I mean, even sturgeon and geese and collared beef and capons and leverets. Isn't it rather more exciting fare that they had in previous coronations?
The coronations of the past, Jacob, as well as the great events of state, whether it was in the Edwardian era or in centuries before, meant that the chef and the caterers more or less had to slaughter every living thing, all wildfowl that was unfortunate to fly in that particular era, during that era. It's one of the reasons why shooting over the centuries was controlled, because the people who lived in grand estates and grand houses took great pleasure in basically slaughtering everything and conserving very little. We've moved on a bit, I'm glad to say now, and we live in more humble and modest times where, you know, the king has.
But do we really? The choice of food we have now is very wide and very great, and I can't believe you've suddenly become a vegetarian and don't want us to eat a little bit of meat now and again.
Not at all. I mean, I actually think this quiche is a great vessel for one of the devil's great vegetables, which is broad beans. I expect when you eat your broad beans, Jake, you probably have
broad beans are horrible. They taste of powder. I've never liked broad beans.
Yeah, that's why I think a broad bean should never really be served on its own. It goes much better in a broad bean hummus or indeed a quiche. So it's a very good use for that hated vegetable. So I salute it for that. But of course, you know,
I think the best use of broad beans is to be fed to pigs. They're disgusting.
You can. I missed that, Jacob. Say that again.
I was just saying, it's a bit like Dr. Johnson's view on cucumbers, that you should prepare them carefully and then throw them away as being good for nothing, that broad beans should be fed to pigs or to other livestock.
Well, if you want to miss out the middleman, you can put it straight in the compost bin. I agree. But again, as I say, it works very, very well in hummus. Oh, have you ever eaten hummus, Jacob? That has garlic in it.
No, I don't like garlic. I think garlic's terrible stuff. Makes people's breath smell apart from anything else.
Yes, well, there we go. I mean, garlic is one of the most fundamental ingredients in the world. It's at the basis of some of our most exciting cuisines, and it's a shame that you're so inert and inward-looking that you refuse to appreciate some of one of the vessels for the greatest of flavors in the world.
Well, you don't get garlic in a Bath Oliver biscuit or in roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, or for that matter in a cream egg. So all the best foods are garlic-free.
Yes, well, I mean, that's about the limit of your repertoire. So I would advise you, Jacob, to, open your eyes to the wonders of the culinary universe. And who knows, you might learn something.
So have you yet cooked this new flan or quiche?
I haven't. I have to say I've only ever cooked a quiche once, but it was a seminal moment in my life. I think when a man can achieve a quiche, it's almost up there with an event such as the birth of a child. Because if you can create the pastry, if you can set the custard, I did it a few years ago with asparagus. It was a beautiful rectangular thing, a wonderful object of beauty with the asparagus laid out along the sort of tray of the pastry. It looked beautiful. It tasted great. And you don't have to worry if you're a vegetarian that there isn't meat in it, because of course you can put some ham next to it, or indeed grill some lamb chops. So this is the quiche. Quiche is a vessel that you can take wonderful ingredients to the coronation, and therefore it's very practical. You can have it lukewarm or cold.
I'm quite intrigued that you thought that a real man had to cook quiche and you've only done it once. So was once enough, and then you thought you'd have something nicer?
I felt that I'd achieved that particular ambition of mine, and I went on to do other things like that. Also, I know you don't do, like change nappies.
Well, I'm delighted to speak to the ambitious William Sitwell, whose great ambition in life was to make a quiche, whereas I wish he'd kept the asparagus pure. But thank you very much, William. That's all from me. Up next is the revered Dan Wootton. Mr. Wootton, are you going to be talking about quiche this evening or something else?
Nation chicken is genuinely one of my favourite dishes in the world. So no, I'm not supportive of the quiche. We do have Tom Bauer here, who has a lot of revelations, though, on the coronation and the decision for Harry to attend without Meghan, plus the astonishing downfall of Nicola Sturgeon's reputation. We're exploring that. And should Philip Schofield be sacked by ITV? Well, Kim Woodburn says yes. She's going to be here to explain why.
Well, that all sounds very interesting. Tom Bauer's one of the best-informed men in the country, so that should be absolutely captivating. Though, for the record, I don't like coronation chicken either. That's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow from 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine day for many tomorrow. Sunny spells, a few showers are possible in southwest England, and there will again be a brisk easterly wind generated by this chunky area of high pressure sitting over Scandinavia, keeping things mostly dry, but also feeding in easterly winds from the North Sea. Hence why it's felt pretty chilly in Scarborough. Well, it's also been pretty balmy in northwest Scotland. That easterly wind continues to bring in some cloud over parts of northern England, Wales, and a few showers through the night across southernmost counties of England. Very hit and miss. Most places will stay dry. Well, we've got the clearest skies. A bit of a chilly one across Scotland. Pockets of frost are possible in rural spots, but that easterly breeze generally keeping temperatures in towns and cities between 3 and 6 degrees. We start tomorrow then with a lot of cloud in southwest England, a few scattered showers. Might even see the odd heavy one here and there, but they tend to ease away. Quite cloudy at times through Wales and the Midlands. the odd shower is possible, but most places dry and bright. Some good spells of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and Eastern England. Again, the western half of Scotland, 18, 19 degrees, whereas that east coast will struggle to get much above 11 or 12. So quite a chilly feel with that wind, which continues to blow the cloud away out west as we go through Wednesday night and into Thursday. Again, a bit of a chilly start on Thursday, some hints of frost there through some sheltered glens across Scotland, but generally it's another fine day with plenty of spring sunshine on Thursday. Again, we'll have that east-west contrast with that easterly wind keeping things fresh on the easternmost coast. Maybe some heart around the coasts of northeast Scotland, but western Scotland seeing sunshine. Not quite as warm here, but still 16 or so.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to